Welcome, everybody. My name is Valerie Sloan, and by training, I am a glacial geologist, but I now work in education and diversity at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, which is in Boulder, Colorado. And today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Tom Bigford from the Coastal Society and formerly at NOAA. Maybe you can wave, Tom. And Elaine Mason, a recent graduate of a master's degree in environmental sciences and management at University of Rhode Island, and she now works with us at NCAR and the Coastal Society on this project. Tom?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the intro. The three of us are working on a collaborative project between the Coastal Society and NCAR through a small grant from NSF, National Science Foundation. We've been connecting with MSIs across the country, including the islands, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, and the mainland, Alaska, all the way from coast to coast. And I see we've got people from all those coasts on the call here, so that's great. Our goal is to support faculty and students in exploring careers in ocean and coastal sciences. So we're trying to connect with people just like you, from universities just like yours, and beyond, to give students a better preparation for graduate school and a professional career. Elise?
Thanks so much, Tom. Welcome again, everybody. So happy to see all your faces here. I'm going to go through some quick housekeeping just in case you didn't get the prompt when you logged in. We are recording. We hope to share this with people that have attended afterwards. That said, we would love to see everybody's faces, but we completely understand, situations. So, bring whatever you'd like here. Feel free to participate in the chat. Right now, we have asked, anyone to share what schools they're calling in from, or their locations or affiliations, just so we can get to know each other a bit better. Let's see, what else am I missing? Oh, I did want to just also say that we hope that this is a safe space. We hope people feel comfortable sharing whatever level of, their experiences that they hope to share, and that people are respectful of everyone's point of view, and that we all are speaking from a place of ourselves and understanding that we cannot speak for whole groups of anyone. So that being said, I am super pleased to introduce our three wonderful panelists. We have Elaine Shen, a PhD candidate at the University of Rhode Island, Tashiana Osborne, a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University, and Ahmiya Cacapit. I am so sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. And Ahmiya is a PhD student at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Thank you all so much for being here with us today and sharing your experiences. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and talk a bit about their science. I think, we're excited to hear about their experiences, dealing with their identities. We also want to share, our love for science and make sure that we highlight that we are scientists as much as we are people of color. And so I'm just going to go through in the order that is on our screen here.
Elise, hold on. Can we stop? Because I wanted to go over the support network map first.
Oh, okay. Sure thing.
Thanks. So before we started, I wanted to introduce you to something that was developed by the Earth Science Women's Network. So this is an activity that we're not doing, but I just wanted to show it to you. It points out several kinds of support and mentoring that we all use. And you can see like the circles with the solid lines describe in simple terms what those are. Sponsorship would be somebody who, say, nominates you for something without maybe your knowing. Accountability could be a writing buddy that you meet with once a week. Intellectual community could be your peers or faculty, for instance. And emotional support can be friends, family, so on. And so this activity, you get this sheet with these empty circles, or it's got different formats, and you fill it out with names of people who you feel fit those roles. And what tends to happen is I know I personally found that I had a few people filling it who were in a lot of different roles, and I had a few gaps. And so I realized, oh, I should probably expand my collection of people that I rely on. So the idea is partly to, well, to make us aware that we can't really rely on our advisor to be everything to us, for example, and to find people who can fill those needs and support you in different ways. So even by, for instance, identifying, okay, I need to find somebody who can help me with this or that, and then to reach out to them and ask them if they could have coffee, for example. Or if you need an accountability partner, set up a weekly working meeting with a peer or a colleague. So I encourage you to go check it out online. You don't need the link really, but if you do ESWN support network map or mentor map, it'll come up. And I think it's quite a good exercise. So with that, I'll just hand it back to Elise. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, and sorry, I should go back. Here's one other thing is, since we won't be showing slides after the panel starts, on February 3rd, we have another panel. It's a non-academic career panel with ocean and coastal science professionals of color. So we will try to send that out to you beforehand. Okay.
Awesome. So I've also put that link in the chat for anybody that's looking for it. And I will go ahead and introduce Elaine Shen.
Hey, hello from my childhood bedroom in Houston, Texas. It's unceded Karankawa territory. There's like a lot of overlapping tribes actually that used to be in Houston, so I'm not entirely sure which one is the correct one. Anyways, I am a PhD candidate. I'm in my 4th year at the University of Rhode Island, and I went to Rice University in Houston, Texas, my hometown, before I moved up to New England. Currently, my dissertation focuses on the impacts of fishing in the environment on coral reef biodiversity in Indonesia. And I'm recently more interested in just marine conservation policy and how that gets conducted and enacted by various organizations. So that's kind of the scope of my dissertation research. I am currently in 2 labs, so I'm co-advised and I'm a part of 2 lab cultures. So I can certainly speak to a variety of grad student experiences, I think, as a part of that. And what else can I say? I've worked with a lot of different organizations like the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, where I did field work, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And currently I'm on a USAID funded project. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And Elaine and I met at URI when, I was struggling. We were struggling. I won't speak for her, but I was struggling to get through the pandemic. And I know that I reached out to networks that were available to me and would not have met this wonderful, wonderful person if I had not. All right, so I'm going to move on now to Tashiana.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining today from Maryland. And so for my undergrad, I'll just quickly summarize some of my academic background. My undergrad, I was at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, which is my home state. I grew up in both Minnesota and Arizona, so I kind of was between the two, living with different family members, depending on the time period. Then at St. Cloud State, I completed a double major in meteorology and hydrology. And I was initially very intimidated to go into any type of physical science, really. But I kind of grew as I went. And I don't think that it ever came easily to me, any of the classes or coursework, but just it's something that I grew into. And I realized, oh, well, I might want to go consider grad school now that I know what grad school is. So then I applied to different grad schools. Scripps Institution of Oceanography was my dream school, and I ended up getting into it. And I finished my PhD there recently last summer, which is really exciting. Yeah, thank you. It feels really good, and I'm cheering for all of you who are going through the process of grad school or whatever pursuits you're in right now. It feels so good to have that under your belt. And while at Scripps in San Diego, I focused on these atmospheric river events. They're storms that basically form over the Pacific Ocean and travel over the ocean and eventually can hit the Western US. And those lead to most of our extreme weather and water events, like flooding events that we experience there, and also allow us to have this nice snowpack when we do have it. Climate change is changing that, and have water for water supplies. So they're really important events there, but they can also cause these hazards. So I was considering those from kind of a radar approach, using radar observations. And I always wanted my research to have a tie into society, like a close tie. So for that, it was more these extreme events that can affect humans and ecosystems. But I didn't really get to go into that side as much as I wanted to, I think, during my PhD. So for my postdoc, when I was trying to decide what do I want to do next, I was really split between, academia and non-academia. I was really open to all of it. But for the postdoc that I wanted to do, if I was going to stay in academia and do a postdoc, I was very particular about it. So I was really fortunate to find something that seemed to fit and then to actually end up getting it. And that's where I am now at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm focusing on actually, it's in the field of malaria research. So now these weather and water forecasts that I can produce can be used, the output from them can be used as input for epidemiological models to forecast malaria risk. And I'm focused on the regions of the Amazon. So quite different in some ways from my PhD, but that just goes to show what you can do with your skills and how you can add to your toolkit as you go. So just to summarize some of these pictures too, I've been involved in a lot of different activities and organizations throughout grad school. And I've been, for instance, delegate for the United Nations Conference of the Parties, the climate change conference, for 3 years, and was able to share my research there. So I can talk about kind of these like science policy and communication type activities and maybe some opportunities, and also giving back. So I'm interested in the side of mentoring and outreach quite a bit as well, everywhere from elementary all the way up through grad school. So happy to chat more. Any questions that you might have, I'm happy to address.
Thank you so much, Tashiana. That is so fascinating. And I love that you really work hard to tie your work back into the community. Ami is next.
Day. My name is Ami, and I'm currently in La Jolla. I'm a Chamorro student, which is the indigenous people of Guam, and I did my undergraduate at the University of Guam. Throughout undergrad, I was active in organizations like ACES and SACNAS, as well as like local clubs at my university, and we ran a lot of workshops to support people of color in STEM, especially in STEM opportunities and careers. I also did a few REUs throughout undergrad, and those experiences inspired me to pursue graduate school. So currently I'm a first-year marine biology student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I study coral reef ecology through large-scale photomosaics to track how reefs change over time. And yeah, I'm happy to share these experiences with you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for those introductions, and you're all inspiring, I have to say, and I'm so happy to have you here too. So we have a couple of questions for you, and then we'll open it up to people who are attending if they have questions. And there's no particular order of answering, so just go ahead and answer if you feel inspired. So the first one is that, as you know, well, once you've been in graduate school, you know that there are a lot of challenges about being in graduate school, such as having a lot of pressure, but not a lot of support or structure, finding your own motivation to progress through the work, things like that. And so we were wondering if you could talk a bit about challenges that you find, and that can be sort of generally, or if you wanted to address, especially as a student of color in a majority white institution, what kinds of challenges you faced, and then we will go over to talk about how strategies of managing. But I just want to sort of we'd like to hear your experiences about that. About grad school.
So is it okay if I just jump in?
You bet.
Okay, just want to make sure. So one big one for me was this feeling of being excluded or just kind of brushed over, thought of as other, or, where do we place this person? So one thing that I noticed was that it was oftentimes coming from my own peers within my first year cohort. And that was really difficult because those are the people that sometimes, you want to be able to study with, you want to be able to prepare for tests with, talk things out so that you're, learning in different ways. And I felt like it was difficult to form that study group where I could feel comfortable and confident expressing my ideas and answering questions. So something that I did it was kind of a natural path that I felt like I had to go on, was to kind of build this group using other options outside of just my own first year cohort or the main cohort. So for instance, we had students that were coming in from different engineering fields to just take one class here or one class there. And a lot of times, they were students of color or international students. And we ended up forming a group together naturally, just feeling, that we could actually support each other, be able to respond to questions without feeling like we were less than. That was really important. So that was incredibly valuable for me to kind of try to form my own study group with others without any intentions of who's in it, who's not in it, but just who I felt like I could express myself with.
That's a great idea. And I could see how, that sounds really difficult. And I have read that and heard about, like the physical excluding and other kinds. Elaine or Ahmi?
Yeah, I think another challenge also when doing graduate school during a pandemic is the distance and lack of connection that there is, especially now that most schools are online. And I think as a person of color, it's really hard to ask for help sometimes. And I think that's just a cultural thing that's ingrained in some people. And when you put a barrier like a laptop or online classes and online work, that is just another boundary to where that communication gets harder to express. So I think opening up those doors and I think talking to like my lab mates for help and ideas has definitely helped me progress in my workload, and also like studying and connecting with others in this sort of virtual sense has been a challenge, just because it's hard to know what people's backgrounds are when you haven't really met them in person and haven't actually interacted with them out in an academic setting. So I think breaking down those boundaries, especially during your first year, is really important to grow, because these are the people who you're going to grow with in grad school.
Mm-hmm. And you were telling me earlier that you were in person last fall. So I guess that at least helped for a first semester. Yeah. Okay, Elaine?
Yeah, I was trying to think of like some more succinct advice. And I was noticing that a lot of the people in the chat are already in PhD programs in their first year or in their master's. So you've already picked a lab probably at this point, or you generally know your cohort. And I would say that when I moved to Rhode Island for graduate school, it was the first time that I had left Houston for any significant amount of time. And I moved into a state where I didn't know anyone except the people in my lab. And that was really challenging. And I heard the other day that it takes 2 years to make good adult friends. So if it hasn't happened for you yet, it's not too late and you're not doomed. I just think that it takes time to make those close connections. And I do think that that's true because now that I'm in my 4th year, I finally have friends outside of graduate school, but it did take a lot of time to foster those relationships. So don't beat yourself up if that's not happening yet. And you're still trying to keep in touch with someone who moved to a different part of the US for their first job out of college or for whatever, whatever life stage they're at. I think that's totally normal. I would also say that I like to speak in cliches now because I'm like older, and I think that's something that you do when you're older. But I think comparison is a thief of joy, and it's really tough in a PhD program where you don't have a lot of strict deadlines. You don't even have grades half the time that mean anything to get a sense of how you're progressing. So the only way that you can really know if you're behind, which is my deepest fear, is either asking your advisor, which I try not to do often because I'm sure he finds it very annoying, or to just compare yourself to your lab mates. And my advice for that is to ask your advisor if you're behind in more creative ways, and then just trust them to tell you the truth. So I'll say like, oh, like, is this deadline reasonable? And then sometimes I'll flat out ask, am I behind? And the answer has always been no. So just know that everyone is coming to grad school with a very particular set of experiences, and everyone's timeline looks totally different. So, it's just different for everybody. And I think the final thing that I would say is that over the pandemic, I really felt this lack of structure that I'm sure all of you felt. And so I decided to, in my type A fashion, back calculate from my proposed defense date, all of my deadlines up until like fall 2021, I think. And that was helpful. So if you want like a pragmatic piece of it, with a month of leeway, like with a month of nothing. So now I generally have a sense of like what goals I should be meeting, and I'm able to structure my time around that. So it's good to have those like long-term timelines, but also short-term deadlines and stuff like that.
And good for you that you're able to do that and impose, some short-term deadlines. It's one thing I love about not being in grad school is having lots of deadlines that just come all the time, actually. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other more clearly. So thanks. Those are great tips, and I think we should write them down and share them afterwards. I guess, so the 2 other things, one is to think about, so for panelists, for those students who are either considering, well, let's say considering graduate school, what might they expect? And you have addressed that somewhat, and how to prepare if that's even possible. And I guess the next question is really about what are some of the other effective strategies that you have used to persist, to boost your self-confidence? Who have you connected with, and what other things have you done that you found helpful? Ahmi?
Yeah, I have a really hard time being away from home because this is the first time I've lived away from Guam, and it's very far away and it's a big time difference. But I think trying to connect back with my culture has been very helpful. I've been taking these free online Chamorro lessons, which helps me like feel more Chamorro in a way that I think has been missing since I've moved away. It also helps to stay active with like your undergraduate organizations and sort of give back, because I know I definitely wouldn't have been here where I was, since there's a lot of unspoken rules in academia and when you're applying to graduate school that I think a lot of people from smaller institutions just don't know how to navigate through the process. So I think breaking down those barriers and actually explicitly saying what needs to get done and how to succeed in this career will be helpful, and sharing that message is good. Yeah.
Thank you. And were you, Ami, have you been involved in some of the, like the organizations like ACES? You mentioned that earlier, didn't you, in your introduction?
Oh yes, I'm currently Lighting the Pathway Scholar, which is a great program to help you connect with other Indigenous faculty. There's also organizations like SACNAS, and then even just locally reaching out and holding like a workshop or a CV training or resume training for smaller groups is also another way that you can share like what you've learned and how to succeed.
Cool. Yeah. You can not only take these workshops, but you can teach them, right? Tashiana.
Yeah, so I was thinking more about some of the tips maybe to prepare for grad school. And I don't really think there's one thing that will, completely prepare you for that experience, but something that I kind of wish I would have been able to learn earlier is how I learn, meaning outside of the slides or the presentations in class, the best way that I just as a unique individual can learn. For some people that might be, maybe they need to create flashcards, maybe they need to talk about it with someone else, maybe they need to just keep reading it. So that I think would be really beneficial, because during grad school you end up, the beginning, maybe you have the coursework and you can, you're more around others, although during the pandemic, I know it's a different situation. But after that, when you're preparing for your research project and defending it and everything, that's much more independent. And you kind of have to understand how you learn best, and then also build a team around you. So kind of like building that study group around you, if that's possible during the virtual setting. I know it's different, but building this team around you of different types of mentors, like Val mentioned. I, for instance, was working in 3 different labs. So I also had, as Elaine had mentioned, I had different experiences with each of the lab cultures. And I also had 3 advisors then. So it grew from 2 to 3 because I realized I really needed, it was really valuable to have each of them and to give each of them that credit, but for different reasons. So maybe one you can speak with more about technical concerns, or maybe you speak with a postdoc who's just a little bit in the next step. So they are still aware of a lot of the coding and details that you might need to know. And then another one that was actually like moral support. And that can also, it doesn't have to be your direct advisor necessarily, although ideally it would be them as well. But you can find these different types of mentors that suit your needs. And that's part of what shows at the end of the day, by you building this team, that's part of what you can use to show your advisors that you're ready to defend. You've learned how to learn on your own, but you also learned how to grow this team around you where you are actually the expert on what your research is, and others can help support that.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love that. Elaine, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think that there have been some really great tips offered by the other panelists. I guess I would agree with Tashiana in that before graduate school, I think some really important things to know. Well, the most important thing is that you know yourself. And again, to reiterate, know how you study, know how you organize your files. That's like a really pragmatic one, but like learn your file organization system, learn how you're going to back up your code. If you're a coder, that's like super in the weeds of it. Because right now I have physical copies of papers, I have an iPad, I have like it's a mess. So maybe try to do that for yourself before grad school. The other thing is if you have the access and the ability to find a good therapist, I would recommend that. I think that establishing a good relationship with a mental health counselor before you are in the thick of graduate school can be really helpful and important. It depends on obviously if you have health insurance and if your insurance covers mental health support. So I know it's complicated, but I read a lot of self-help books before I went to graduate school, and I went straight from undergrad. So I know that that's not a very common experience, but I went from graduating undergrad to having a summer of trying to wrap up my undergraduate research to going straight back into school. And I do not recommend that necessarily without also figuring out like how you might operate in a graduate student environment, which will change, but just like knowing yourself and your boundaries also is really important.
Mhm. Good advice. Yeah, it can be necessary to take a break to recover and remember how to rest and take care of yourself. And I wanted to just add on that in terms of that choosing your grad school, that it's really important to find out about the culture of the group and the department that you're going to. And maybe one school is not as prestigious as another one, but that's sort of secondary. It really, you want a community where people are kind and supportive. And one of the ways to find out is to try to talk to graduate students who are already in the program. And also, if you look online at the different faculty members in that department, and you can see how many grad students do they have, and if they have 0 to 1 or something like that, they may not be very good to work with. And if they have 17, then it still could be a good environment, but it's going to be, you'll be working more with postdocs, that kind of thing.
I just wanted to chime in. I know I'm not a panelist per se, but being somebody that just came out of grad school and I don't have a PhD experience, I have a master's degree experience, and it was a 2-year program, and the majority of it happened during COVID. So I was sitting, at home by myself trying to figure out. And Ami had mentioned that sometimes it's really difficult for us to ask for help because, we think that, okay, we made it to this point. At least for me, I think I made it to this point, on my own, even though that really wasn't true. And so I should be able to figure it out. I'm a graduate student now. I should be able to figure out all the things that I need to know. And that's just unrealistic because, you do need a network. And I also had trouble identifying with the terminology network just because it felt a little bit, I didn't feel closely to it as I did to like a community. So I felt that, okay, I do need people around me. I do need to, support, and I need to see that as a community. And that can include, that included my mother, that included, I took 2 years off between undergrad and graduate school. And that included some of my coworkers and my supervisors. One of them that helped me write my personal statement to get into graduate school and still writes me letters of recommendation to this day. And so just, think about who really supports you, and it doesn't just have to be in graduate school or in your academic setting.
Right. And having people who support you write letters is more important than having some famous person not write you a great letter. And I love this idea, like what Tashi and Elise are talking about of, creating a community. It's kind of a lifelong process, wherever we are, we want to make sure we have enough people to connect with that we feel supported and we can thrive. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is along these lines is, how do you ask for help from people that have offered in passing, but that you don't have a close relationship with?
I was just going to say, I think that that's a great question, and that's
Thanks for sharing that. I'm sorry that you had that dreadful experience.
I also think that if someone offers you help, then they know, or at least they should know, like that offer is like what it means, because I think a lot of people are very overwhelmed with some stuff. So at least in my personal experience, no one has ever offered me help when they were too overwhelmed doing work. And I think setting that boundary first is also very important, because then you're not spreading yourself too thin. But then actually accepting that help is also another challenge, because there are some people who have infinite amount of resources and knowledge to share, and they offer this help, and some people just are too shy and in their shell to actually accept that help. So I think understanding that it's normal for people to cold email and actually say, oh yeah, can I run this idea by you? Or, oh, can you review this fellowship application for me? Because they actually do want you to succeed. I don't think anyone who offers help will actually take it back, like if you set those boundaries, like Elaine has said. So I think just taking it step by step and seeing what they can give and structuring that help session or whatever it is that they can provide and support you in a way is a good way to set those boundaries.
Thanks, Ami. And she's totally right, that people don't mind at all in general, don't mind being cold called and asked, can you look at my resume? Or can you tell me about your job? People love to connect, but they also have problems connecting. There's a question from Khalifa. It says, did any of you pay out of pocket to attend graduate school, or did you have scholarships so that you could attend?
So for me, I was at Scripps, as I mentioned, and once you're accepted as a student into Scripps, then they have a salary, basically a salary for you. It depends on the lab situation on whether or not you need to teach along with that. In my group, that was not the case, but I'm not as familiar with how it goes across all of the other departments. And that's partly because I ended up earning an NSF graduate research fellowship, which is such an amazing it was such an amazing opportunity for me, because that's complete funding for all of the 5 years, or 5 years. And then if you need more, oftentimes it's easy. In my case, it's more straightforward to be able to request more, because essentially you were there as a student kind of for free, except for maybe if you get sent to conferences and that sort of thing. So it felt a little bit more comfortable to me to be able to maybe ask for going to a conference, or requesting, hey, I need another year to just finish up this work. Everyone has their own timeline, so that's totally fine, but it's just a matter of then securing the funding. So I feel like I was really fortunate in that case, but I will also say that applying to the fellowships, it can take a lot of energy and effort. I would really encourage you to, if you're considering grad school or even if you're already in grad school, because it just allows you sometimes more freedom and flexibility. And if one lab is not working out as well for you, which was the case for me, I felt more freedom to be able to switch over or combine efforts.
Thank you. Ami or Elaine or Elise?
Well, I always have something to say about money, because I made the mistake of not doing the work to, find that money. And so I took out loans for my 2 years. I doubled the amount of loans that I had in 2 years from my 5 years in undergraduate school. And when I got into my program and I started taking classes, I went to the director of my program and said, hey, listen, I'm not going to make it if I don't have any income coming in. And I did a master's program, so it wasn't funded. And some master's programs are, but many are not, from what I understand. And so I said, hey, I need some money. And they were like, oh, great, we've got a TA position open for, the graduate school pay of $24 an hour or whatever it was. And it's 5 hours a week. So it was enough to get me by, but I, still was stressed, and to have to deal with the stress of school on top of the stress of making sure you can eat and support yourself and, pay your bills is a lot. So I advise that anybody go to their program and really be stern and really be confident in what you need. And if they can't give it to you, go to somebody else. There's always somebody. I ended up finding another professor who said, I wish you would come to me sooner. I've got this extra funding, and so let's see what we can do and make it happen. And so, again, people are there to help you, and they want to be assistant. You just have to find the right people, and you have to, go after what you need. But again, it can be really taxing to do something such as, apply for a fellowship. So it really does matter. You have to balance out what you think you can achieve and who you can use to support you in going through that.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, I thought you might want to share about that. Yeah, as Elaine has put in the chat, it's totally normal to ask about the funding situation of a program that you're applying to. Like, is it, and because you can do graduate school with support, it's especially in the sciences, and PhD programs are commonly supported, and in separate master's programs less so. But what happens is people will do a master's in a PhD program, maybe as a first step. And if you decide it's not for you to do a PhD, then you can opt out after the master's, but then you've been supported through. And I would encourage people to consider the master's degree, because unless you're really keen to do, the academic thing or research thing, because employers love master's degrees because they have project experience, and but they're not as specialized. So it's a good thing to consider, the MS versus the PhD. And Elaine, or if anybody wants to chime in, please do. There is another question, but okay, there's a question. How do you approach asking people to write a letter of recommendation? Elaine or Ami?
When I was applying in undergrad, I wrote to my professors very far in advance, and I told them these are the programs I'm applying to. And I basically made an Excel sheet of the name of the program, the date it was due, the requirements, and like what I wanted them to emphasize as like a little nudge if they needed. And so they really liked that, and I was able to check box like when each one was completed. And then I also followed up if I knew that some people didn't complete their letter of recommendations, that I also had backups. So I recommend organizing all of your grad programs in that way by due date. And that way you can keep track and you're not scrambling and you're not blindsided. But then I also made sure to ask people who I had a really good relationship with, who knew my work ethic and who I knew would just talk well about me and who knew me well enough. And that ended up being like my RU mentors and my RU advisors. And that was really promising because they knew my research experience and how I worked in a lab. And I think that's important because that's what they're looking for in these graduate programs, is how you will be as a researcher. So those are some tips on how to ask.
Right, and you're implying something important, which is one needs to develop relationships with people so that they know you well enough to be able to write a good letter. So try to initiate communication with people that you might want to use as recommenders. It's also totally fine to remind people. Like, I love having reminders like, oh, the deadline's coming up. And so don't ever feel bad about that. And also it's helpful if you it really helps to send, like if it's a job or grad school, like a link to that program or that job. Plus, to help them write their letter, it can be helpful to actually draft some points, like things that you've done. Maybe it's projects that you've worked on in school, or maybe it's organizations you're involved in, or other things that you feel like can show that your letter writer some detail that they may have forgotten. Elaine or Tashiana?
The only thing that I would add to Ahmiya's already great advice is in your first email to say, can you write me, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation with the key emphasis on strong, because you want to make sure every rec letter is very important. And oftentimes professors are trusting their peers, which are other professors, and more than maybe the personal statement. Like, it's one thing for you to say, I'm charismatic and funny. I don't know why I said those two. I think I'm charismatic and funny, but it's another to have a professor say that about you, and so some of those more congratulatory adjectives, only they can really say about you. And so make sure that they will, and that it's going to be a strong letter.
I'd like to add that there's a ton of research now about how letters are actually just rife with bias and prejudice. And so it can be helpful to share that information in advance with letter writers. I mean, I can share some links with you, but in general, women get described as helpful and cheerful and hardworking compared to men being described as, brilliant and having promise, things like that. And then also between white Anglo and non-white Anglo, there are other and similar and different biases. So it's not an objective thing, right? So you can help raise awareness by sharing some of those documents with people to say, just by the way, here's some information. See, so there's a comment from Daniel, coming from a master's program, funding was difficult, and I also took out loans. Daniel, do you want to just talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do it quickly so I don't take up too much time. My name is Daniel. So yeah, I took out loans my first year I was just kind of trying to find what I should do after actually rejecting a PhD program that wasn't a good fit. So I landed at Cal State LA, and I did a biotech certificate program, and there I met a professor, and I didn't have time to actually apply to any internal funding. So I had to pretty much figure out funding that first year. And I a year after, or a little bit after I finished my master's, I tried to develop that resource to see if there was actually any funding in other Cal States, just so I can share to anyone who was interested in that direction.
That's excellent. So if you didn't see in the link, there's a couple of, in the chat, a couple of links that Daniel has shared. Thank you very much, and good job. Benjamin, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on your comment about speaking for yourself. if you don't mind, if you're okay.
Okay, sorry, I'll not activate my video. I'm kind of in a little bit of a messed up background. But yeah, that's said about speaking for self. It's simply the way you tend to interact with most of the people, even when you're looking for programs. So to talk about a professor that you're intending to work with. So you tell them that I'm interested in your program, and but this is my situation. I'm coming from this background. I'm very much looking forward to work with you, but it will be really enabled if maybe I could get something like a research assistantship in this. And then while doing that type of talk, you tend just to, focus on the skill set that you bring with you. And for that reason, it kind of sells you out there as the best candidate for these assistantships that they may have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. That's a good point, to make sure that to highlight what your strengths are and your experiences are, because they may not know them, and you can do that. You can speak up about it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that it gives you a chance to see how those people on the other end react to that, and then help make your decision about if you think that that's a good culture for you to be in or not. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Virginia asks, is there anything you wish your department would have had or would have in place to increase support for you? For example, mentoring or peer support structure, and therefore something you advise potential students to look for in a department, or advise departments to create. I'll add.
I think one thing that would be really helpful is if graduate students are interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, justice work in their departments or in their programs, to have a structure in place where they can be compensated for that work. Not because I think that, people should be able to sign up for a job and not do it with good intentions or earnestly, but because it is really tiring work, and, grad students are going to eventually leave, hopefully, those academic institutions. So what they create and the academic environment they create is useful more so to the school and to future students than it is probably for the graduate student implementing those programs. Yeah. That's what I would say.
So for example, if you and another grad student help to set up some kind of a peer structure or program, right? Or other things, what other kinds of Jedi work have you done in your program? Or Elaine?
I sit on the diversity committee, and I work with undergraduates from minoritized backgrounds. And I've been in a TA or a paid 5-hour-a-week position to do some of that work. And I found that really useful. But I also, and what I'm currently trying to do in my department is establish a special projects fund from the dean's office, because we do have travel funds, travel grant funds. So students can go to conferences or meetings and have some of that compensated by their school or by their program. And I think that if a similar structure could be put in place for special projects related to justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion, that would be really helpful to offset the cost, whether that be tangible, physical objects, or even the cost of doing that work, their time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. Tashiana, do you have any thoughts on that? What structures if you could create a department from scratch to be supportive, what would you want to see?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is I saw this kind of happen during my grad school experience. So what Elaine said, I think is critical. Having this type of Jedi or DEI office or center, and even the space for it, also the financial resources for it. So for instance, at Scripps early on, we didn't have, when I first started my PhD, we didn't have our own diversity initiatives coordinator down at our campus, which is separated from the main UC San Diego campus. And so it's almost like you're on a whole different campus. So it was really important that that type of center and initiative be created on our part of the campus. And in the beginning, the idea was that they would hire a part-time employee, and students in the community petitioned to get full-time, someone hired full-time. And then we were all part of the hiring process, interviews and all of that, which was really important, I think, too. Then we actually have a say on, who's hired and what the issues that we want to first target are. Then what I found is I actually, because I wasn't used to sharing these types of concerns that I had and strange experiences that I had as a woman of color, it kind of scared me to have that community in a strange way. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but I felt like I had to just kind of hold it in and be strong about it. But what I found is that type of center, which I've experienced in the past during my undergrad, I rediscovered how valuable it is and how much I really needed it. I really needed it. So having someone come in who is, first of all, trained in working on DEI, JEDI issues, and then also having some funded, supported community fellows that could be grad students, I think is critical. Then also maybe having organizations like the WMIS, WMIS, Women and Minorities in Science. Those are all great.
Wow, great ideas. I mean, that's cool that you saw that developing, and thanks for also sharing about your own experience about how important it turned out to be for you. Ahmi, do you want to chime in, or Elaine? Or Elaine, did you already? I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm also at Scripps, so I can attest to those organizations. Like, I don't know Scripps outside of those organizations. They've had them since I've started, and they've been very active even in the pandemic. But I think it's important to look out for how students feel supported when you're asking and when you're interviewing other people's and potential labs. Like, are they happy? And if they're not, how quickly do their concerns get addressed by their department? So I think that if students aren't happy, or you can tell that there's not a lot of support initially when they're trying to sell the program to you, obviously that support won't be, or more than often than not, that support won't be there, like when you actually start the program. So it's an uphill battle from there. So I think keeping an eye out on how well students feel in a program is also a good indicator on whether you actually might feel safe and protected in that program. So just talking to people can be really insightful.
Mm-hmm. And asking the prospective advisor about the role of, or how does his group or how did the department talk about issues of, DEI or cultural competency, and see how they respond can be helpful or insightful. Elaine, did you want to add anything?
I don't know. So I think if you are able to, and if you feel safe to do so, voicing your concerns to faculty and deans, you kind of only need to do it once, I feel like, or not, once a year. It can be really valuable. And I encourage you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to let your experiences be heard, but only if you find yourself in a position where you feel safe to do so. So to have like a confidant, like an assistant dean that's specifically focused on recruitment and retention and diverse students, can help make some of those structural changes that can really benefit a department, and you don't have to be implicated in it. So I think having, a dean even, or someone in administration that's specifically there for students of color or from other marginalized identities is really crucial on a more like structural level. Yeah.
And I would say it's, in my mind, it's fine to speak up and say and ask, like, are there candidates, or how many candidates that applied came from minoritized communities? And does the selection committee for a scholarship or for faculty is it made up of, is it diverse or not? Because if you have 5 white men selecting, they're going to have different perspectives from a committee that's more diverse. And so asking that, just asking questions, or be as a student on the faculty, be the representative of students on the faculty and ask questions. I think asking questions can be pretty powerful, where you sound innocent, but you're actually making a point. So Holly, did you want to add on about what you just said about networking?
Yeah, I came here today thinking this is going to be so great for the little niche that I work in my PhD program. I cannot find BIPOC colleagues to be co-authors and to work on projects together. And so, but I know that there's a lot of us students that are up and coming. Like, I haven't published my first author paper yet. And so maybe my name isn't out there as an option. And so there might be others like me. So any opportunity to grow my network, especially with colleagues in my field, I welcome. I'm grateful for everybody who's here today. So I was thinking, like, we could share our social media handles, or it's some way to follow up after today's panel. And thank you so much to everyone who's here.
That's great. I was thinking sort of same, like it's yes, and so does Tashiana. She's got a part there, and we can help facilitate that through a spreadsheet, probably getting permission from people to share their emails and anything, like you say, their handles. But there might be room for further kinds of gatherings like this, like every couple of months, maybe there's a gathering where people can come and share. It's definitely a faculty do this too, and they find it helpful as well. So thanks, Holly. It's good to hear that. Although I'm sorry that you're having no luck finding BIPOC peers. You are in Boulder, so it's not surprising. So there's a question about how much time did you spend, or do you spend, into the research? Like, what portion of your time is actually on, say, doing all the different things that go into doing research? I mean, I guess, Ahmiya, you're doing probably mostly courses right now in your first year, right? So maybe that's more for Elaine and Tashiana.
Sorry, I'll go first, but Tashiana has graduated from PhD, so I don't know if what I'm about to say is successful or not. We'll see. But for me, when in my first 2 years, I was mostly taking courses and teaching, so I did not spend a lot of time on my research other than writing a research proposal, and that was about 5 hours a week. But once I was finished with my coursework, and was finished with like a couple months where I was studying for comprehensive exams and or my qualifying exam. Now I am also on a fellowship, the same fellowship that Tashiana is on, the NSF GRFP. So I spend most of my time on research. And I want the professors on this call to close their ears, but I find that I don't work like grueling hours. And I try to stop working at 5 every day. And I do maintain my weekends out of principle. So, but I also don't have a lot of lab work or like lab cultures to maintain. So I know that that can be very like a regular scheduled time commitment. I don't have that. I'm very lucky, but that's just my personal experience. And again, like if in a year I don't graduate, like that's really bad advice.
I think
just gonna.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. You can go ahead, actually.
Oh, I just gonna say that it's really important. I mean, I think grad school is really bad for helping us to lose our work-life balance. You really forget how to have it, and so do try to let yourself take off the weekend and relax and not feel guilty, and to don't email. If you don't email people at night, this is in my group at work, we've decided that we don't email about work in the weekends and evenings. And it took a shift, but now we don't do it. And it sets a tone. And so please do respect that for yourself. It is hard to find that, especially if you have a child like you do, Sina. Then you just try to work when you can, and it's not something that you can break up so easily.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Tashiana, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, she was.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you both just said. I wish that I would have been able to have a better balance, or I think of it more of like a juggling technique, because maybe you're never completely in balance, but if something's about to fall, one of the balls is going to fall, you have to address it at that moment. I ended up battling a lot of health problems, and some of them were life-threatening during my PhD. So it was very difficult, the timing of it all. And I think that, the additional stress and trying to keep up with all of the workload, and maybe even because I was so ill, trying to overcompensate was just not very healthy. But I was also kind of in this survival mode. So I wouldn't recommend doing it how I did it. I felt like I think I had really severe at times imposter syndrome, especially early on before I had the right networks that I was plugged into with other women of color, and people of color in general. And so I think the balance is really important. That's something that I'm actually doing now in my postdoc. And it makes a world of difference. I find that I'm able to still get the work done, but it's just confined to a certain number of hours, and it's fine.
Yeah, and I think, Elaine, that the professors should actually listen, not block their ears, because they should also support you in not working, crazy hours and be doing that kind of labor. Aditya, do you want to speak about your experience?
Well, I'm in a classroom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I was a new student, international student in this big group, and all these postdocs and grad students, and I was the only master student, so I didn't get a chance to get on the microscope till late at night or on weekend when nobody else was working, and oftentimes there would be no liquid nitrogen, so or they will leave it. So it was not a very healthy situation, and the professor really didn't care too much about me at that point. So it was very difficult to finish the project that I was on.
Yeah, that's rough.
It's from everybody, so it's great to hear this.
So we just have a couple more minutes. We're wrapping up at 1/4 past the hour. Are there any other questions or comments? You can share your information in the chat, and we'll try to also share that later. So Daniel writes, I'm a first year in my PhD, and my first semester I kind of overdid it. I was very passionate about doing research and started initiatives in my department, but also had to sit in the research. People made this easier. They taught me things along the way. It was productive, but it was like sprinting. So slowing down is important. Yeah, that's admirable, though, that you were starting all these initiatives. And if you do that early in the program, chances are your faculty are impressed and they appreciate you for doing those things. You start some kind of seminar session or something. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. I wanted to add a point kind of related to time management, really, but something that I found was really helpful was I attended a time management webinar from Raul Pacheco Vega, and he is on Twitter. I'll post it in his handle, but he has a whole blog of advice for graduate students and students in different PhD programs. But he talks about how he schedules out his months and his years ahead of time. And so really taking the time to even schedule out your week or your month and say, okay, this is the time I spend on school stuff. This is the time I spend on personal stuff. This is the time I spend on, other types of professional development stuff. And, you can adjust it as you go, but by having already an idea already in your head about, okay, I know I'm going to be able to dedicate this much time to this. And if it doesn't get done, it's probably not the end of the world. It may make some people upset, but at the end of the day, your health and your mental health and your experiences are what matters, because you only are in graduate school for so long. Even it may feel like forever, but you're only there for so long. And it's the experiences that you can take and reflect on that you can go forward with and bring into, job interviews, into other mentorship experiences when you're trying to help other people find their way. So I did want to add that. And I had another thought, but it's gone from my mind already, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. And, looking up tips on time management, on the web, like avoiding interruptions, turning off email for, 25 minutes and working uninterrupted, turning on a timer where you say, okay, I'm going to just write for 15 minutes, doesn't matter what it is, that kind of thing. There's some, but I think, as I think Tashiana said, to get to know your own way of learning and what you need in terms of working with other people, or how, and as Elaine said, like for her, structuring everything. Aditya?
Yeah, so I wanted to share one other thing, that when I went from my master's to my PhD program, the professor I went to work with, he got very sick in the first semester I was there. And so, but it was a lot of, he made me feel that I was not being productive, and to the point I could not function anymore. And it was my first semester. It ended up that, I had to change my advisor to a different one. I had to change schools because I was an international student. So there was a lot of tension and pressure. And I think, that's an element that comes up, a lot of time when you go to work for a program. It might not work out, but there could be, opportunities otherwise. But it is very difficult situation when it happens. But luckily there was a second professor who picked me up at that time. He had a grant and I worked with him. And then I got back with my older professor and he was on my committee still. But that first semester, it was him that was sick, but I did not know. And there was a lot of imposter syndrome and, how to survive that.
Yeah, and the environment didn't sound so great. Well, thank you for that. And so the panelists are putting their emails and in the chat. And yeah, we wish all of you really the very best, and we'll help try to connect you with each other going forward. Really wish you will take good care of yourselves and slow down, take time, and try to do those things that help you feel good, those small things that help you feel good, because what is life without them, really? So I guess with that, we're right on time. So thank you so much. And thank you. Let's give a hand to our panelists, however you want to do the hands, like virtually or clapping. But thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. And really loved your advice so much. I'm going to make notes on this stuff. So good luck, everybody. And thanks again for coming.